everyone, it's Carol here at Oakhouse Journals. Lovely to have you with me. I'm going to do assignment number 6 or week 6 of Lisbeth Degn's Stitch Circle Show Challenge 2025, or as I tend to call it for simplicity, the Dogma Embroidery Challenge. Now, this is the first signature in my little journal that I'm creating. I've almost finished it. So I showed before, I've just taken a piece of fabric and I've printed on the front what the challenge is about. And that was week 1. That was week 2. That was week 3. Week 4, and this is the last one. So I've got one more page here on the back, which will be for this week's assignment, and then I will put in my Dogma rules in between each of these pages, and then have that ready to stitch into my little journal. From assignment number 7 onwards, I'll go into the next signature. So the rules for this week. The first rule is to take inspiration from the planets and our solar system. So I'm going to put that to one side. I've got a piece of paper here, roughly the size of my little signature. And what I thought I would do in terms of a design is to get a circle. Let me do this. I'm going to do it sideways on. Get a circle, something round about that size. It's going to be a single circle. And I'm going to embroider a couple of rings around it, something like that. So that's the design I'm going to go with. The second Dogma rule was to use black or very dark fabric. Now, I haven't got any black fabric, although I would have loved to have used some, but I do have some dark brown silk fabric. And as you can see, I've torn myself a little piece that will fit the size of my journal. So let me flip that over. So it's going to go on there like that. Now, it wouldn't fray top and bottom, so I've got a selvage edge down here and I've got a cut edge here, although I have tried to fray it a little bit. So I'm not sure which way round I might have it, that way, but it has got a nice slub or texture to this piece of silk, so I'm going to be using that. The third Dogma rule covers what stitches we can use. Now, we are only to use French knots and either running stitch, double running stitch or back stitch. Now, I'm going to use French knots and back stitch. And then the fourth Dogma rule, the final Dogma rule, is about the threads, and that was to use white or a light colour and in several thicknesses. So I'm going to use either a beige, very light beige, or cream on here, and I am going to use DMC thread in different thicknesses. So the first thing I'm going to do is go away, find a template or something I can use to create a small circle, and then I'll use my Friction marker pen and draw it onto here. Now, my Friction marker pen is black and it has a very fine nib. It has a 0.5 nib. So I'm hoping that that will work on here. If it doesn't, then I do have a white chalk pencil and I'll have to use that. So as I say, first things first, I'm going to find something that I can use as a template to draw my planet. I've got the acrylic top from a micro bead storage tower, and I'm just using my pen to go around the outside of that. And I'm getting a very faint line, but I am getting a line. And here I'm just going in, doing the couple of rings to go around my planet. The Friction marker pen isn't showing up particularly well on this dark fabric. I can probably see that a bit better than you can on camera. I wanted to use it in preference to the white chalk pen I've got, because white chalk pen doesn't always rub away nicely. I'm not too worried about having a really crisp line. I think I've got enough of an image there so that I can do what I need to do. So, okay, now I'm going to dig out some threads and make a start. I've lifted out some white DMC thread, or Blanc DMC thread, which is a 6-stranded cotton or floss, and I've also lifted out the beige, and I think this will be nicer on the brown. It won't be as stark as that, so I'm going to use this one. And to start off with, I'm just going to use a single strand of the DMC thread to outline my shape of the planet with French knots. So I know I'm going to be using a lot of this. Normally I would just take off one thread away from the 6, leaving 5 on the spool, and wrap the 5 remaining threads back up onto the spool and use the one that I've cut off to start my sewing. But I know that I'm going to be using a lot of thread, so I'm just going to chop a full length of 6 strands away and then double up my strands as I need the varying thicknesses of thread on my piece. Hope that makes sense. So I'm just going to cut all 6 strands off there, and now I'm just going to separate just one thread and start working with that. There we go. I'm going to thread up a needle with that on it. For the time being, these remaining threads I'm just going to wrap loosely around my finger and pop them off to one side, ready for using in due course. I am also going to leave that out in case I need more, and this white I can pop away in my little box there. I've just threaded up a very fine straw needle. Love working with these, they're lovely and delicate, but really only just take 1 or 2 threads, especially if you're using DMCs. I've got a little quilter's knot in the end, and as I mentioned, I'm just going to do French knots, or lots of French knots, all the way around the outside of my circle. I'm just going to do, actually I'm going to do single wraps to start with, all the way around my circle to define the planet shape. So lots and lots of these. I'm not going to follow too closely the line that I've actually drawn on my fabric here. I just want the sense that I've got a circle shape. I'm not going to bore you with going all the way around this because it's going to take oodles and oodles of French knots to do what I want to do. So I'm going to go away, turn on the television and sit and have a nice evening stitching random little French knots all the way around the outside of my planet, and I will come back to you when that's done. So I'm back the following morning after having done a couple of hours of stitching last night, and this is how my piece looks so far. It's nowhere near finished yet, but I just thought before I go any further I'd show you what I've done. This area down here is where I started off doing my little 1 strand thread French knot. So if I hold it up, I hope you can see. I'll put some photographs at the end so that you can have a look. But here I've just done 1 strand DMC threads, and I went all the way round my circle doing that initially. And then as the night wore on and I was happily stitching away, I've got a loose thread there, sorry. As I was happily stitching away, I doubled up my strands of cotton to a couple of strands. So as you can see, I've got some texture going on round here, and I'm going to do more in this area down here, but I didn't want to do it last night. I wanted to leave this little section so that you could see how I did my initial single strand French knots. As you can see, I've done a few sort of going out the side here. I plan to do a lot more on the background area away from the circle, but I also plan to build up the circle a little bit more with some more texture. And then, as I said before, I'll go in with my couple of bands around the planet. So I'm going to go away again and carry on doing some more French knots. Maybe I'll do a few on camera here so that you can see. Let me bring the camera down a little bit more. There we go. I've got a quilter's knot in here. So all I was doing very randomly was going in. I've got a single strand in here and a very long thread, so let me shorten this up a little bit. There we go. So all I was doing was basic French knots, a couple of strands, pulling my thread tight and creating my knots. And you don't have to be, or I wasn't being particularly accurate in terms of where I was putting my knots. I was just enjoying watching the television and stitching away, trying to a little bit to keep inside the line, but not too concerned about that really. So I hope you can see what I'm doing. It's never very easy, I find, stitching with the camera on because of the layout I have for recording. So again, just building up. It'll take a while using a single thread, so that's why I went into a double thread or 2 strands of DMC to do these pieces up here, but also the Dogma rule required that as well. So just going to just randomly do my wraps, just try and build up some texture. You can of course do more wraps around your needle, but the more wraps you do, the wonkier the French knot becomes. So ideally you wouldn't want to do more than a couple of wraps around your needle. So I'm just going to, I've got a bit of a gap going on here. As you see, I've gone inside the line, so I'm just going to fill that up a little bit. French knots is one of my favourite stitches of all time to do. That and colonial knots, actually. Not sure why. So I could sit and do this forever and a day. I really enjoy it, find it really therapeutic. And also, if you've got one of these New Zealand felt mats, it's fabulous for doing French knots, because as you can see what I'm doing, I'm anchoring my needle down into it, pulling my thread because it's stuck into the mat, pulling my thread tight and then lifting it up. If you haven't got one of these mats, doesn't matter, because you could equally do it on a cushion or something like that. You don't have to do it by anchoring into a cushion or the mat, like I've not done it there, but it actually makes it a lot easier and quicker. Last night when I was stitching these, stitching around here, as I was watching television, I had a cushion on my lap and I was using that to anchor my needle in it as I was doing my French knots. Okay, so this would take forever and a day to carry on building up this little section. So I'm going to go away now and finish off this section. A quick jump, and this is where I got to so far. I've built up more texture around my circle, and I've done a few French knots in different numbers of wraps around the outside, splaying out from the centre of my planet. I've tried to do one wrap and very tight knots towards the outside, and obviously slightly looser knots with more wraps up here and closer to the planet. So that's all I'm going to do. I did originally think that I probably would splatter more French knots towards the outside of my piece, but I'm not going to. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in with backstitch to do my rings round the planet. I've got 2 thicknesses of DMC thread in my needle ready to go. Okay, so here I've made a start with my first ring. I'm doing backstitch, but I'm doing a split backstitch. So that's my first ring round my planet complete. Making a start on my second ring. And almost finished with the second ring, but I want to do some detail inside each of the curves of the first ring, and you'll see that in 1 second. There you go, you can see I've just done a little bit of detail inside each of those curves. And because that split back stitch looks very much like chain stitch, I decided to go over it with a single strand of DMC thread and actually whip the stitch. So I'm doing that on the top ring in this picture. I will be going on and doing it to both of the rings. It doesn't really alter the detail that much, but if you compare it with the second ring, you can probably make out a slight difference. It almost closes up the stitch and blurs the fact that it looks like a chain stitch, or at least that's what I was hoping. Because I used 2 strands of cotton, it made my split back stitch look like chain stitch, and I really wasn't happy with that. Here I'm just showing the texture in the fabric and also in the amounts of thread that I used to outline my circle, or planet I should say. And this is the finished piece, ready to glue into my little journal. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. Really appreciate your company, and I hope you'll join me next week for week 7. Until then, bye bye now.